This is episode 511 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined by Gerges Scott. He is a senior vice president at Agenda Global, and we can talk a little bit about what Agenda Global is, but welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Gerges.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure to talk to you in any form.
Exactly. Thank you. Well, you are fresh off of an airplane visit to England across the pond. So you may be the most recent ever guest on Tipping Point, New Mexico in terms of international travel. Any jet lag remarks that you may make, we'll make sure to edit those out. Yeah, but you were, well, you can describe your own itinerary and where you went and a little bit, just about what the vibe is like across the pond as America grapples with the debt crisis and other things.
That's a lot to unpack, so I'll do the best I can. But first of all, thanks for having me. And yes, I am the senior VP at Agenda Global. We have been in business. We were first, if many of us know, many know in the community, D.W. Turner, which was Doug Turner, and we bought up other little small firms around the country and created a major public affairs firm. We are here, Doug and I, of course, are here in Albuquerque, but we have offices in Washington, D.C., Irvine, California, Brussels. We are now in Georgia, the country of Georgia. And what we do is we're public affairs. We started out as being public relations, and we morphed into public affairs, which basically is government relations, media relations, community relations. It's basically anything that you can do for your client to move the ball forward or improve the conversation. And we work with a lot of major organizations and corporations around the world. NATO, for instance, I've done work on the Nord Stream project years ago. Do work oil and gas here in the state and in Texas and Colorado, and various mining projects. And I've worked on Keystone, the pipeline. So I've done a lot of different energy projects. I've been involved in a lot of different political things. And what I was doing out in the United Kingdom was we are part of a global communications alliance, and that's basically the name of the new organization, Global Communications Alliance. And we're all basically crisis communicators, and we all work together in sharing clients or sharing ideas around the world. And it's always a great conference to go to connect with our counterparts and peers and hear how they do things. And the big discussion right now, to be frank, is not so much about obviously energy and the Ukraine, but the looming threat of AI and what all that means. And so we are probably going to be the first communications organizations that's going to come out with a mission statement and the guidelines about dealing with AI. And we don't have it yet together, but we will have it by, hopefully a year from now. And there's a lot more research we have to do. But I think, this reminds me of what I said when I was in Edinburgh. Is the conversation we were having reminded me when I was a former journalist and I was working in television. And back then, when I started in television, it was the days of Ron Burgundy, in where we used film. And so when I left the TV, we were doing stuff on basically computer chips and editing that way. And what my former boss had once told me years ago was, no matter how news is gathered or how information is distributed, there's always going to be a need for people like us who are communicators and can analyze that information and break it down so people can understand it And regardless of what AI does in the future, it's never going to be human. So there's always going to be that human factor that hopefully those of us that do this business are going to be able to still find a job.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You're the first person, by the way, in 500 some odd episodes here. Of course, AI, as we know it, has only been kind of a topic of conversation for 2 to 3 months. I mean, outside of course, Terminator 2 and Skynet and the other kind of applications, if you will, of AI. But being in public affairs, that's something that there's at least a plausible threat from AI in the sense that folks who are involved in writing press releases and a variety of information-oriented writing could be in trouble. So, what have you been talking about within the scope of AI? It can't be just the Gerges Scott Employment Protection Act. There's
No, exactly.
where do you see things going?
And that's actually a good point, because one of the things is, I don't care what business you're in, there's always going to be, bad characters, right? And so if I'm working and a client hires me and I'm writing them an original plan on research and on their particular issue, and I deliver to them, a 25-page paper, a plan, a strategic plan, that's all going to be an original thought process. And it may take me, maybe 30 days to write all that and do all of that work, where someone who would maybe charge the same amount of money as I do would go to, what do they call that? That chat
GPT.
Yeah, that deal, and write in some stuff, and then this AI software puts out a paper for them. That's unethical, and that's what we're talking about. And just as I was coming over here to do the show, I was listening to the news about a lawyer who actually used that chat GPT thing and turned in a legal brief that had the legal citations that were from this chat thing. And he got caught and he had to apologize. And I'm thinking, just apologize? He should probably have his, whatever they do to lawyers about, disbarment or whatever. I don't know. But that's the concern that people have, not just in my business, but in legal and people who work in geology or whatever, in the sciences. If unscrupulous people, unethical people are going to use this system to basically use it, it's plagiarism. It's basically what it is.
Yeah, and because so the AI is coming up with the information.
Yeah, exactly.
It puts in from...
Yeah, it just takes it from all these different sources, and it may be good to help you to do an outline, but you still have to do the actual work, and that's what we're talking about. And that's the concern of a lot of people that I've been reading about, and concerns about the application of this system, of this new frontier.
Yeah, well, I would, for one, be glad to travel over to Scotland and England on a trip to discuss AI. If you
that was only one of the discussions.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't all of it, but
all
yeah,
right.
That's exactly what the kind of things we discuss.
Well, before I leave your trip to across the ponds, there's been, they have a very radical green movement in parts of Europe. And you said that your travel plans were impacted somewhat by that. Can you describe that situation?
So there is the same type of environmental activism that goes on here in the United States, is go on in England. I think it's a little bit more aggressive over on Europe, rather. There are these groups that do protest, and they show up in, for instance, there's a big deal. It's the Super Bowl of gardening. It's called the Chelsea Flower Show. The BBC, it's a week-long deal. The BBC does coverage on it, and at night they do, a weekly wrap up like it's the NBA playoffs or something. And so this group of protesters showed up there and did some damage. They did vandalism to this at this event. And so there's some of the groups that I was there with. They had asked if I would come to attend a meeting in London on Friday, and which I did, and we had some really worthwhile discussions on how the overall oil and gas industry is going to respond to this. And I think you'll start seeing more reaction from our side, the people who advocate for oil and gas. And it's not so much, it's always such disingenuous arguments that the environmentalists give us that if we're advocating for oil and gas or energy, it's all about affordable energy for me. And when you advocate for that, you're someone who doesn't want clean air or clean water, and that's just disingenuous. Of course we do. I don't believe in the solutions that these groups want to do, and I'm a believer of all forms of energy. I've worked on all different projects, whether it's fossil fuels or renewable or nuclear, and you just have to, in a state like New Mexico, for instance, I believe that we can't demonize one form of energy over another. And so that's what a lot of the discussion is just how do we have these discussions and deal and make our positions known in the media without basically coming off as flippant, because they are serious discussions. But it's like what Gandhi used to say: first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, then you win. And I'm sure I got that all wrong, but we can't allow them to have the upper moral ground.
Yeah, well, I'll be interested to see what the energy advocacy side does about some of these radical groups. Thankfully, they haven't necessarily come to the United States, but of course, these are the people who are, throwing paint on
they're here in the United States, and they're doing things. We just, they just do those kind of actions to Americans we find appalling, and they find appalling in Europe too. But we're such a big country compared to what's going on over there that we kind of neglect or don't see what's going on. We got some other things that happen here in America that kind of take up
fair enough
issues that we don't pay attention to, these paint throwing incidents.
My own view, and I'm always in for creative ways to counter radical folks in their approaches, but blocking traffic and just vandalizing great works of art and disrupting flower events, those seem like things that 90+% of people, at least in the United States, don't support, regardless of their politics. But it is something that can affect a lot of people's ways of life, and that's really.
But you asked me about what in Europe they think about what's going on here in America, and we could do about 5 different shows. They are concerned. I'll tell you this. They recognize more than anything now, especially what Russia has done in the Ukraine, that we are America's we are the world's police, as far as the forces of good, and they look to us to defend democracy as we know it against the forces like Russia and China, and they're very concerned and very worried when we're having our own internal. To us, it's just Tuesday, right? When we have these kind of internal debates over policy in this country, and that have gone extreme for sure. But we'll deal with them. But they're always concerning about how we will come out on the end of it all.
Well, I mean, if I was a European, I'd be concerned, as I am as an American, about our geriatric old presidents, to name one thing. But we can move on from there. I wanted to get your take, and you worked as a representative of the Holtec company, nuclear storage, spent nuclear fuel storage. We had some folks from Holtec many moons ago on this show talking about what they were proposing in southeastern New Mexico. Now that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has approved the project, although legislators and the governor passed and signed a bill to prevent Holtec from doing business in New Mexico. Briefly describe that project, your role with it, and where things are going with Holtec.
Sure. So Holtec International is basically an energy company. They create products for energy industry, whether it's oil and gas or renewable, or and in this case nuclear. And they have developed a system to store the used fuel from the reactors, electric generating nuclear reactors.
Real quick, one question that somebody asked me
Sure.
once is, this is from civilian energy
Yes,
production.
it is.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Perfect.
not DOE, for instance.
Right.
No, it's like, for instance, Palo Verde or Comanche Peak in Texas. So after about 5 years, that fuel is not productive. It's still good fuel, but in our country, as you know, back in the late 70s, President Carter did not allow the recycling of this fuel as they do in France, because of the concerns that, bad characters would use that to create bombs. That's obviously not going to happen. But, what Holtec does, and what Holtec was proposing and is still proposing for New Mexico, southeast New Mexico, is, first of all, they were invited by the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance, which is made up of Carlsbad, Eddy County, Hobbs, Lee County, and they have this land in between Hobbs and Carlsbad, and that land would be used to store these canisters, and the canisters hold these fuel assemblies. And it's been called an interim storage facility. The concern that the governor and Senator Heinrich and others have is that this would be a de facto permanent repository. And because Yucca Mountain hasn't opened. This could never be a permanent repository because A, the law is not allowed, the federal law does not allow for it, and B, it's not designed to be a permanent facility. These canisters can be deployed into the system that Holtec has designed, and then retrieved and taken to a permanent repository. Or in the future, this fuel can be used again for things like advanced reactors, which is what's the way the industry is moving. And so it's not really waste, because it's going to be, it could be eventually be used again, and just like they do in France. And so the NRC has already approved, just about 3 weeks ago, approved the license. Holtec went through, they started in about 2015 to go through this long process, which is very comprehensive. And they have to just jump through so many hoops to prove to the NRC that this facility is safe. And by the way, if you took all the used fuel that is currently in the United States at various sites and put it in one location, the size of it would be a size of a football field 10 yards deep. And that's what we're talking about. It is not this major, I don't even, like these big solar farms you were talking about in one of your earlier podcasts. The big concern is about the transfer. I think many of the opponents recognize that the facility is safe and the technology is safe. So now their concerns is A, it's going to be de facto permanent repository, and B, they're not happy about the transportation. It's done by rail. But I would remind your listeners and everybody else that the government does this every day. They transport, the DOE transport, as we know, whip shipments by truck. The DOE transports shipments of the fuel rods for the Navy every day throughout the country. On the East Coast,
Nuclear
and the West,
submarines and the like,
submarines and aircraft carriers, they have their used fuel that has to be somewhere. It goes to a place in Idaho, so they already do this transport. It is safer than these train derailments that we've been hearing about in the news, which, the braking system is one of them that I read hasn't changed since the Civil War, right? These trains that are used for transport of nuclear materials is the safest thing in the world. And the trains are modern, and the technology is modern, and the rails are inspected before the route is determined. So there's a lot of safeguard.
And the local community wants it.
The local communities down in Lee
Right.
and Eddy County are in favor of it, and of course the state and legislators and the governor have not been.
And it's 400 jobs and
It'll be
$3 billion of
It's a
investment.
$3 billion capital investment. That's if it was built out in all the phases. What Holtec had promised to do is not only build that facility, but because their manufacturing facilities are on the East Coast, they don't want to be transporting all of that stuff out here, so they would build a manufacturing facility in New Mexico. So that's where those other jobs come in. And then they would build a workforce training center here in New Mexico to A, train those workers to work at that facility, but B, also to work at any other Holtec facility around the world. And so those are other jobs that would be created. So there's three different for sure that would come out of that deal, out of that particular facility, interim storage facility. And then Holtec was also, if that all came to happen, they would also build a research facility here in New Mexico and work with Sandia and Los Alamos and any other research facilities.
Okay, so before we leave Holtec, we've got the state law that passed. Unfortunately, Democrats in the legislature who claim to support, the environment and zero carbon energy production. They are also NIMBY types, and they did not want to see this facility come to fruition in southeast New Mexico. So they passed a law, and governor signed it to prohibit Holtec from coming here. But that was, almost 10 years into this process. Whose ball and whose court? Where does this go next?
So the jurisdiction of anything that involves nuclear in this country is with the federal government. So basically, Holtec will have to, and they're in serious discussions of taking legal action, and the government and the NRC would be part of that lawsuit. They would be the plaintiffs suing the state of New Mexico because New Mexico basically is overstepped its boundaries. And they've worded it in such a way that they believe that they are not in violation of federal preemption laws, but it'll be a federal court to make that determination.
All right. Well, we will be watching and discussing and waiting to see what happens because clearly, southeast New Mexico wants this, and I think it's a good thing for for restarting the nuclear electricity production in the United States. And if the green movement is serious, they need to put nuclear back at the center of electricity generation. Of course, Martin Heinrich says he wants electrifying our economy. He wants that to happen. So he's got a lot of explaining to do if he were to actually engage. But anyway, all right. Well, the next topic I wanted to talk to you about today is at the end of April, Progress Now New Mexico, which there's a lot of vile left-wing organizations in New Mexico. I would say that Progress Now is right at the top of the list. And I'll use the term so you don't have to. I'll call them vile because they're not only radically left in their political orientation, they play fast and loose with the truth. And they had a press release sent out saying that the state had hired a oil lobbyist to head the economic transition in the state of New Mexico. And this is due to Senate Bill 112 passed in 2021, which tasked the Economic Development Department with oversight in the development of the Sustainable Economy Task Force and Sustainable Economy Advisory Council. And they're saying that your firm, Agenda, got a $100,000 contract. They quote Representative Angelica Rubio, who there's basically certain hard left progressives who say that you are supposed to come up with a plan to transition New Mexico's economy away from oil and gas. That's the gist of the story. What is really happening here, and what are you trying to do, or what are you tasked with doing on behalf of the state of New Mexico?
Well, thank you for allowing me to have this.
Clear the air, Gerges. Clear the air.
You know, the scope of work is not anywhere close to what that individual described. The fact is, not one person. I think it's absolutely flattering that they would think that I would be the one that would to create a plan to transition the state out of an industry that's been 150. You know, the fossil fuel industry is 150 years old, and so that I would come up in 2 months, mind you, with a plan, a transition plan to take the state, which is number 2 in the nation in oil and gas production, and put it into what they call the green energy economy.
Well, we're already a month in, so you should have this ready to go.
I'm going to do this. You know, it's just not possible. And first of all, the state, I don't think the state would have one person or just one firm do it. I think this is something that there should be the Sustainable Energy Task Force that you just talked about, who really, I looked at the members, and I'm not here to disparage anybody, but they need a little bit more energy-focused people in that group. The fact is, we're not doing any of that was described. What we're doing, before you could even go down that road, is we're looking at, we have economists that work with us that are looking at all the data that's been done, economic data, and we are revising that data because, you know, we had something called a pandemic in between all of this when that law was enacted. And so we have to come up with where exactly the state is. And what I'm doing is, so the economists, let me go back. The economists are gathering all that data, and they're having a hard time doing that because, as I said, we've just been going through a pandemic. So the numbers are kind of skewed, and formulas that you normally would have used prior to the pandemic are they're just not workable right now. And so what I did, though, is I devised a survey, which I can send to you and have you fill out, because we sent it to a bunch of various stakeholders around the state to get their opinions about and their thoughts about economic development in New Mexico and how we should be moving forward. And so I'm going to write the report on that, the results of that questionnaire. I wouldn't really call it a survey. And what I'm seeing already, obviously, and what I've known already because I've lived in New Mexico 45 years, is that the southeast part of the state is really the leader in New Mexico as far as economic development and the engine moving the state forward. And so when we have these kind of discussions or thoughts that we need to get out of that industry and go into another industry that's just really not fully developed yet, is worrisome. And so we're going to be writing about all of that and gathering the thoughts and feelings and perspectives of people who are in the economic development industry or who work in their communities to try to bring jobs and try to, figure out like how things are working in Gallup as opposed to the way things are working in Hobbs, and try to put that perspective paper together, and hopefully that would drive the discussion moving forward. But I am not being responsible for doing something as grand as that.
Well, that's very disappointing, first and foremost, Gerges, because I really, if I had to look at somebody to solve all of New Mexico's problems, you're on my short list, let's be honest. But I want to kind of conflate two issues we're just talking about. You look at, well, how can we get away from so-called polluting, oil and gas, and diversify our economy? Well, I know this is going to come as a huge shock to you, but SB 53, that's the bill that attempts to prohibit the Holtec facility. Representative Rubio, who is quoted in this Progress Now piece about how ridiculous it is to have this energy lobbyist in charge of this plan for diversifying our economy. She voted for that legislation. So if there is an attempt to diversify away from oil and gas, Rubio is explicitly against it. And that was a bill that had a lot of Democrats not supporting final passage, at least in the House. But on the other hand, I have to say, Gerges, that the Rio Grande Foundation, I think we have a legitimate plan to, if we had to. Now, very clear, Rio Grande Foundation supports the oil and gas industry. But I could come up with a transition plan. I just can't take the $100,000 from the state. And I can't give them a plan that the current crop of legislators will support. It involves abolishing the gross receipts tax, input taxation, services. We go right to work. We adopt repeal of Davis-Bacon on public works projects. We basically completely transform our entire education system to a either voucher ESA model. We actually reduce tax burdens because we have all these permanent funds sitting around. We can use those dollars to help with the transition. I mean, I could come up with a plan in basically an afternoon. I'm not saying that you could come up with the plan that would not be laughed at by the legislator. And that's the problem is until the mentality of New Mexico's elected officials, from the governor to the legislature to everybody on down, changes dramatically, we are going to rely very, very heavily on the oil and gas industry to pay the bills in this state.
Well, you actually hit on it, is that every 4 or 8 years it changes, right? Mm-hmm. Because, and we'll use Holtec as an example. When Holtec first came to the state, they received consent from then Governor Susana Martinez. And the legislature passed memorials, both in the House and the Senate, in support of the project and encouraging the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance to move forward. So now, 8 years later, a whole new administration comes in and new members in the legislature, and they pull the rug out from Holtec. So the problem is not who is in power. The problem is that there's no consistency of thought. And so if we're always going back and changing what the previous administration agreed to, then we're never going to move forward. And that's the problem. Paul.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you. Yes, unfortunately, the situation in Santa Fe has deteriorated politically quite dramatically in recent years. We just have a few minutes left to go, and you shared with me a news story about renewable energy and just the reality that it's not ready for prime time. The idea that we are going to support all of Western civilization on wind and solar, it's quite a long way off, if ever, that this is going to happen. And I wanted to give you a chance to share some of that information with listeners.
Well, the article I'd share with you, I came across a couple of weeks ago, and it's ironic to me that the fact is that the renewable energy, the way the environmental groups and these that advocate for that, it's not sustainable. To use their word, which is often overused. And the fact is that they want us to replace, as I said earlier, an industry that's been around for 150 years, and that's the fossil fuel industry, with this new energy, renewable energy. And that's fine. I'm not against wind or I'm not against solar, but the fact of the matter is both wind and solar energy need a lot of minerals. And right now, you need a lot of minerals for lithium, for instance, to do the lithium batteries. We don't produce that in the United States in the quantity that you need to. China does. Mm-hmm. You need cobalt. We don't do cobalt at all in the United States. Africa does. And China controls all those mines.
It's China. That's the pronunciation.
I don't care. Don't give me that. I'm from Portales. You're going to get what I give you. And so I'm just telling you is that we need to have this serious discussion, because the fact of the matter is it is going to be do more environmental harm to our planet if we try to go down this, and we are going down this road. And the fact of the matter is China's controlling all of these minerals, and we as a country are not prepared to, we have an EPA that doesn't allow us, for instance, to build a new oil refinery. So if we had a new oil refinery, we could deal with a lot of these issues as far as the oil and gas surplus that we deal with all the time because of the supply and demand. And so going to this whole new renewable energy, we just need to be more well thought out, is a bottom line.
Well, you couldn't say that any better. Yes, well thought out and done with rational thought processes in mind. And obviously, the Biden administration really is fixated on this idea, as are folks like Senator Heinrich. But
let me just real quick. The Biden administration is 100% behind nuclear energy. And so that's the kind of ironic problem that I have with our current administration here in New Mexico.
Yeah, well, and I was just going to say that, mining, if you are going to do a lot of what they claim they want to do with regard to renewable energy, they're going to have to really expedite and encourage the development of a lot of mining activity domestically, or we will be, really 100% reliant on pretty hostile nations like China, which I don't think anybody wants to be reliant on them, both from a security perspective as well as an environmental perspective, because the out of sight, out of mind approach doesn't mean that it's any cleaner. China's not got the environmental regulations and anything like what we have in place here in the United States.
Absolutely.
So, anyway, well, Gerges, I'll give you a second to share if you want people to contact you, if you want to make your work known publicly, feel free to do that now. Otherwise, we can leave it there.
Well, people can I'm always amazed that people do track me down, and that's fine. I'm not ashamed of what we do. I believe that, everybody needs an advocate, just like in the legal system, the energy industry needs an advocate, because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Excellent. Well, great. Agenda Global, you can find them. He works with our friend Doug Turner, and gets to be an international man of mystery traveling around. Any other international trips you got lined up?
I'll be in Carlsbad, I think, early June. How's that?
Oh, that's not quite international, but I'm sure it'll be lovely in Carlsbad in late June. So maybe down in the cave, in the caverns there. All right. Well, thanks for your time, Gerges, and thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path Remarketing for producing this show.